Welcome to Uncommon Knowledge. I'm Peter Robinson, and join us, if you would please, on Facebook at facebook.com/UNC Knowledge. Facebook.com/UNC Knowledge. Of Persian descent, Fouad Ajami was raised in Lebanon, coming to the United States at 18, a senior fellow at the Hoover Institution, and the winner of this year's Bryndell Journalism Award. Dr. Ajami is working on a new book, Crosswinds, The Way of Saudi Arabia, which will be released next year. Next year?
That sounds
Next year. Sounds right.
Allah willing, as we say.
All right.
Yes.
During his career at the State Department, Ambassador Charles Hill served as an advisor to Secretaries of State Henry Kissinger and George Shultz, a fellow at the Hoover Institution, and the diplomat in residence at Yale. Ambassador Hill is the author most recently of Trial of 1,000 Years, World Order and Islamism. Fouad and Charlie, welcome.
Thank you.
Segment 1, The Collision. I will put this as succinctly and provocatively as I can. Islam is founded in the 7th century, and within 3 centuries, it conquers all of the Middle East and North Africa, much of which had been Christian, subjugates the Iberian Peninsula, penetrates Europe as far as France. In 1453, Islam conquers Constantinople, completing the conquest of Anatolia and the Balkans. And as recently as 1648, Muslim forces lay siege to Vienna. To what extent is it correct to see 9/11 and contemporary Islamism as the most recent incidents in a permanent struggle between Islam and the West? Fouad?
Well, I think that's the subject of Charlie's magnificent book in large measure. And it's also the subject of a great classic by the historian Bernard Lewis, a colleague of ours, a friend of ours, who actually has a book in the Hoover series of books on Islamism called The End of Modern History in the Middle East. And the title of his book is What Went Wrong? What Went Wrong? So history went wrong for the Muslims, so they believe. Muslim historiography insists on this, that we had risen, we had conquered, we had prevailed. And now look at our contemporary condition. And many, many Muslims, I think many Islamists, definitely the majority of Islamists, the people who believe in political Islam, saw 9/11 as almost this kind of strike against the West. Let there be soot and ruin in their streets. Let them see and feel the Muslim hurt. So I think this Islamic history
It's felt.
Absolutely. It eats at the Arabs. It torments the Arabs. And the old splendor, if you will, becomes kind of a rebuke to the present.
Charlie, I'm going to quote you to yourself. Dirty trick. From Trial of 1,000 Years, you're discussing the Middle Ages. In Christendom, side by side with the emperor was the Pope, who possessed spiritual authorities denied to the emperor. In other words, state and church are divided early on in Christendom, in the West. The Caliphate emerged wholly otherwise. Thus, Islamists vehemently reject dualities, while the West is foundationally defined by them. Elaborate on that a little bit for the layman.
This is a huge, profound philosophical difference. It's the way that a people, an individual, a society, a culture would define itself. And the fundamental difference here, and it's a strange one in some sense, because in the West, and I think the West really has become the heart of the overall international order today. There is an acceptance of a willingness and even a valuation of dualities, church, state, public, private, body, soul, and so on. In the Islam that you're describing, it's uniate and a constant desire, constant drive, an assumption to you must get rid of these variations because they can only deteriorate from the overall oneness that you want to achieve.
Right. I'm intentionally trying to be provocative here, but just to get at deep stuff. And so what I want to do is bear with me for a moment, because I'd like to rehearse what the Pope said in his famous and turned out to be inflammatory, I think to his surprise, address on Islam and Christianity in Regensburg in 2006. This is interesting, I think. So the Pope is talking about one of the last Byzantine emperors, Manuel II Paleologus, who is in a dialogue with a Persian captor. and now I'm quoting the Pope, who in turn quotes someone else, but bear with me. The decisive statement in Manuel's argument against violent conversion is this: not to act in accordance with reason is contrary to God's nature. The editor, this is the Pope talking about the text he was using in studying this, the editor, a scholar called Theodore Curie, observes, quote, "For the emperor, as a Byzantine shaped by Greek philosophy, this statement, not to act in accordance with reason is contrary to God's nature, this statement is self-evident. But for Muslim teaching, God is absolutely transcendent. His will is not bound up with any of our categories, even that of rationality," close quote. That's just what you were saying, is it not?
That's right.
Okay, so Fouad, God transcends even reason. No human categories apply to him. And in the proper Islamic state, in the caliphate, there is no distinction between church or state. The caliph is responsible to this transcendent, utterly transcendent God. We have two civilizations which are fundamentally and permanently incompatible.
You know, I am a man who actually is interested in the life of the street. That I don't know as much about books as Bernard Lewis does, and I certainly don't know as much about books as my good friend and partner, Charlie, does. I'll tell you something about Islamic life. The streets meander. The streets twist and meander. So in fact, when we take a look at this idea of the caliphate, that it knows no separation between God's realm and Caesar's realm, that's in theory. In practice, the caliphs were troubled people. And if you take a look at the history of the caliphate, 3 of the caliphs who succeeded the Prophet Muhammad were struck down by assassins. So in fact, the history was very, very, very tangled. And when you begin to trace the history of the caliphate in Islamic life, as it moved from the Arabian Peninsula, the birthplace of the Prophet, it went to Damascus, and from Damascus it went to Baghdad and on. The caliphate was seized by pretenders. Mm-hmm. It was actually a Praetorian phenomenon. All of them were basically coup makers. And then they were captured by the Mamluks, by their slave soldiers. So yes, on some level, if you take a look at Islamic theory, there is this noble idea that you don't know a distinction between God's realm and Caesar's realm. But when you take a look at the messy history, the way Muslims lived, not the way they talked about their life, it was always a very, very tough and gritty reality. And the religious class was always subservient to the ruler.